Ironically serving as one of the foremost influencers of many people's formative teenage and childhood years, Adult Swim carved its way into modern culture with its bizarre subject matter, instantly recognizable art styles, and absolute boldness to air shows that no other network would even touch. This is the Adult Swim Iceberg. Bumpers. Otherwise known as bumps, serve as transitions between the shows and commercials being played on Adult Swim. They would become synonymous with the network, and they experimented with a variety of styles and presentations. The very first bumpers on the network were shots of older people swimming in a pool with a narrator explaining the situation.
All kids out of the pool for Adult Swim. All kids out!
Most people believe the narrator to be the lifeguard that was currently looking over the public pool. This particular bump lasted from 2001 to 2003 and would also describe which shows would be playing during that night's segment. They would eventually begin to experiment with new and unique bumps involving characters that were featured on their lineup of shows. These early bumps featured their original logo, but in 2003 they would introduce their current logo that we have all become accustomed to. At the same time, they introduced their new format of bumpers with a black screen and white font. The text would also feature a variety of topics from pop culture to unique opinions to seeming randomness. They would also feature a host of different music that some argue would go on to inspire the modern craze with lo-fi music. As the years went on, Adult Swim would get more and more experimental with their bumpers, displaying eccentric, unusual, and downright creepy imagery. Many of the bumpers would feel as if they were speaking directly to the viewer, including what felt like personal messages, like telling the viewer to go to bed, as it was remarkably late in the evening, and many people would have to wake up for the day's responsibilities in just a few hours. Several bumps would go on to become quite popular, such as "The Dawn is Your Enemy," which we will cover later. These bumpers would seemingly take on a life of their own, and recently have even inspired a plethora of content creators to create their own Adult Swim-inspired bumpers. It became such a popular trend on TikTok that even Adult Swim themselves decided to take part in it. Adult Swim's saved shows. Aside from the thought-provoking original shows created for Adult Swim, there are several shows that the network would syndicate after they had been canceled by their original networks that aired them. Some of the most notable examples include Family Guy, American Dad, and Futurama. Today, it's easy to look at the shows and comprehend their popularity, with the latter even having a host of new episodes set to premiere in 2023 on Hulu. All of these shows would first air on the Fox network, but they would go on to be canceled by that network. Adult Swim saw their potential and purchased syndication rights for the original seasons, and would even go on to continue the series with new episodes. Adult Swim was the perfect place for these shows as the demographic perfectly aligned, and these weren't even the only examples of shows that really didn't reach their maximum height in popularity until their introduction on Adult Swim. The network introduced Western audiences to a number of adult animations like Fali Kali and Cowboy Bebop, as well as some introductions of some slightly lesser-known animations like The Oblongs and Samurai Jack. And this would be just the beginning, as their integration with a previously used Cartoon Network segment, Toonami, would bring forth a plethora of animations that would reach new audiences for years to come. Boston Moonanite Bomb Scare. In an attempt to promote the 2007 Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie, several local artists were hired to perform a form of guerrilla marketing. They were tasked with placing 40 electronic signs that featured of the Moonanites flipping the bird to passers-by. It wasn't long before one of the signs was spotted underneath an interstate bridge. Unfortunately, it was mistaken for an IED, an improvised explosive device.
It was January of 2007. Dozens of electronic devices placed all around the city to promote the Cartoon Network show Aqua Teen Hunger Force, but they were mistaken to be bombs. Highways, bridges, some transit stations were closed around Boston. The devices were ultimately traced to two artists who made a public apology and then performed community service.
It created bomb scares, congestion, and confusion, disrupting the city for hours. Turner eventually paid a $2 million settlement to the city. Brodowski and an accomplice did community service, and charges against them were dropped.
Before long, the rest of the signs had been discovered, putting the entire city of Boston on high alert for the duration of their safe removal. The fiasco was eventually resolved when Turner Broadcast Systems was charged with $1 million to be paid out to the city of Boston's task forces, along with public apologies by both the network and the two men that had originally been hired to plant the electronic signs. Interestingly enough, the show writers would eventually create the series' only episode that was never officially released, with an unofficial response to the event in the unaired episode of Aqua Teen entitled Boston. Not surprisingly, Turner would pull the episode before its airing to avoid additional controversy. Despite this, the episode would eventually be leaked and can be found online to this day. In January of this year, the official Adult Swim Twitter account posted a jab reference at the event with an image of an electronic ignignokt also flipping the bird, displaying 13107, never forget. April Fools. Adult Swim has become notorious for their yearly April Fool's Day pranks. The very first prank they pulled was in the year of 2004, where they aired a normal broadcasting schedule, except each of the shows featured characters with mustaches drawn over the characters. The following year, during a scheduled slot of Robot Chicken, they instead played an unfinished pilot episode of the show Squidbillies, immediately followed by an announcement of the show's premiere later that year. In 2006, Adult Swim would air several syndicated episodes of the Mr. T and Chuck Norris cartoons from the 80s.
Karate Commandos, Super Globetrotters, a Gary Coleman joint, Gigantor, and Mr. T's Big Black Power Hour.
Pity the fool, pity the fool, pity.
They also aired episodes of Full Metal Alchemist and Ghost in the Shell with added fart noises to spice up the dialogue. The following year, they altered episodes of their anime lineup to play in reverse order, as well as added effects to appear as if they were digitally downgraded to appear as if they were old VHS tapes of the show. They also intentionally implemented subtitles from incorrect shows. And perhaps their most infamous April Fool's prank came that year as well. Adult Swim announced they would be airing the yet-to-be-released Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie, but when it came time, they aired the first 2 minutes of the show that had previously been available to the public. However, after this, they aired the rest of the movie in a tiny subsection of the screen on the lower left corner, while the rest of the screen was dedicated to their normal broadcast schedule, including shows, commercials, and bumpers. Adult Swim seemed to go the extra mile for each April Fool's Day, doing such great acts as premiering future unannounced shows, airing a movie called The Room with explicit sex scenes covered in gigantic black boxes, and special bumpers that were only applicable to the network that year. After several years of showing this same movie, they pranked the audience once again by claiming to be another airing of the movie, but instead it was the reveal of the Cartoon Network segment Toonami, complete with the host Tom, who was voiced by the world-class voice actor Steve Bloom. The rest of the night featured episodes of anime that had typically been associated with Toonami, claiming that it was for that night only. Side note, as many of you have already guessed, this character was the sole inspiration for the avatar used on this very channel. After the airing of this Toonami segment, Adult Swim asked its viewers if they'd like to see the continuation of Tom and the Toonami bit, to which a resounding yes was the answer. 1 month later, Toonami officially returned as a mainstay. And perhaps one of the most spot-on pranks the network had played on its viewers was in 2016, when they went over the previous year's April Fool's pranks and gloated about that current year's fantastic upcoming prank, to which there was no prank. Year in and year out, Adult Swim would implement notable April Fool's Day pranks with such acts as cats featured over every character, unaired episodes of previously canceled shows, as well as unaired outtakes from the shows, added laugh tracks, unannounced show premieres, and much, much more.
The Illuminati, it controls everything, and it's watching you. By the way, what with the Illuminati? One, it's not real, and two, don't like the Illuminati.
Infomercials. This was the umbrella term for several independent 15-minute-long comedy specials. It parodied real paid programming seen on many other networks late at night. All of the programs are completely fictitious and completely unrelated to one another. Several episodes of this series would gain massive notoriety for a number of reasons. This House Has People in It and unedited footage of a bear both originated in this show and would go on to become infamous within several online communities. I covered both of these more in depth on my alternate reality game video. The lineup of false infomercials ranged from bizarre to comedic and everything in between, oftentimes veering off the subject matter entirely to focus on some other arbitrary topic. The first of these infomercials was shown in 2009 as a pilot show called Paid Programming, and it covered Icelandic Ultra Blue, a fake, ambiguous health pill. Instead of describing the product, the show primarily featured various people pitching catchy slogans for the product. The pitched Paid Programming show was never officially picked up by Adult Swim. However, they did greenlight a number of new episodes in the same fake infomercial format, which introduced the people to the mind-melting greats like Too Many Cooks, unedited footage of a bear, and This House Has People in It. The Dawn is Your Enemy. This bump started as a 10-second clip that featured this image and unnerving music being played in the background. It ran for several years during the early days of Adult Swim, used as a sign-off for the network before it returned to Cartoon Network's programming, and would eventually be taken off the air. Several years later, Adult Swim would bring back the bumper in a different manner. In a supposed attempt to be more positive, they would instead display the text, "The dawn is your frenemy," and a nice touch was added when the sun in the background actually winked just before the ending. One fan would go on to create a creepypasta describing an extended version of the clip, which featured grinding metal sounds as well as people screaming. Eventually, a fan would go on to create their own version of this creepypasta, complete with the winking sun. We would eventually go on to learn that the audio in the background of the original bump was simply a sample from the beginning of an underground hip-hop song.
Violence is a menace. Hey, if you only took a second out in life to realize.
Aqua Teen creators lied. The creators of Aqua Teen Hunger Force originally pitched the show as 3 crime-solving detectives and the hijinks surrounding them. They felt the premise of random anthropomorphic food items doing various random things was simply not enough to convince the network of their show. The first few episodes of the show's first season featured an emphasis on the trio being detectives. The show's intro even featured visuals that would indicate that they would be partaking in some form of action, jumping out of a helicopter, fighting an octopus, and breaking down the door to catch would-be mechanical thieves. But by the 4th episode of the show, the creators ditched the premise altogether. Despite dropping the detective gag, the notion was revisited several times throughout the series. Seth Rogen's phone number. During the first episode of Season 3 of The Eric Andre Show, Seth Rogen was invited to take part in an interview. The wild antics that would normally take place in the show were featured, but the creators went the extra mile in trolling shenanigans by displaying Rogen's real phone number at that time.
What's your cell phone number?
What's my cell phone number?
We'll just put it up at the bottom. Anybody has some comments, questions about...
I don't want to do that. Please don't do that.
Several hasty and lucky fans were able to actually speak to the actor before he discovered what had happened. He tweeted to the show pleading them to stop calling his number. Obviously, he would eventually go on to change his number, but this wasn't the end of the bit. Sometime later, Eric Andre would appear on the Conan O'Brien Show, where both of the hosts would go on to reveal Seth Rogen's supposed new number. This time, however, Seth was in on it and assisted in the gag himself.
Guys, quit giving out my number, okay? It created a nightmare for me.
Seth, how do we reach you then in the future?
Oh, it's 323-834-2079.
Leaked Dexter episode. The Cartoon Network's original show, Dexter's Lab, had one episode that was banned before it was aired. It was titled Rude Removal. The episode featured Dexter and his sister Dee Dee having all the rudeness from their bodies removed and contained into an otherwise identical version of themselves. The rude versions of the characters were constantly cursing throughout the episodes, and despite censoring the words, it was still too much for Cartoon Network, and it was officially shelved from TV appearances. Although it was shown at several animation festivals over time. In 2013, Adult Swim uploaded the leaked episode to their YouTube as well as AdultSwim.com. It was quickly taken down, but not before fans were able to download the episode themselves. And not surprisingly, some fans were able to edit the footage in a manner that appeared to be the uncut version of the episode, though it was most certainly a fan-made redubbing. Adult Swim shows that aired on Cartoon Network. Many shows were pitched for Adult Swim that, for various reasons, were declined. Some of them were lucky enough to get referred to Cartoon Network instead. And even though they would appear perfectly aligned with the style and aesthetic of Adult Swim, Cartoon Network would approve them for airing on the more child-friendly network. The Problem Solvers is by far the most recognizable example of this happening. The art style, animation, and downright trippiness of the show is right at home in the Adult Swim lineup, but for whatever reason, were recommended to Cartoon Network. There is no publicly acknowledged reason for their pitch being denied by Adult Swim, but it is theorized that the edginess of the show was only slightly tuned down upon Cartoon Network's approval. Another show that is theorized to have originated as a pitched Adult Swim show is titled Sunday Pants, which also has a remarkably similar style to many Adult Swim shows, including strange writing and a mixture of crudely drawn animations intermixed with live-action recordings. It also aired Sunday nights and was one of the first shows on Cartoon Network to have a TV PG rating. Several other shows are also theorized to have originally been designed with the Adult Swim segment in mind. Many people claim the regular show is a prime suspect for this. Obviously, it would have been tuned down for the airing on Cartoon Network, but some claim the show was originally intended to be much darker, especially with the creator of the show's original drawings featuring a much more adult theme. He also would go on to work on a more adult-themed show after the regular show as well, though neither Sunday Pants nor the regular show have been officially confirmed to have originally been pitched for Adult Swim. Metalocalypse petition. The show Metalocalypse was originally envisioned to have 6 final episodes to wrap up the conclusion, but due to budgetary restrictions, Adult Swim denied series creator Brendan Small's request. In response to this, Small created a change.org petition to encourage the finalization of the series, and even urged the fans to send guitar picks to Hulu in an attempt to strike a deal with Adult Swim to pick up the final season. They even hosted a rally in front of the site's headquarters in California, complete with several famous metal musicians appearing to support the cause. In response to the fan uproar, Adult Swim brought forth their own petition system. They offered fans the ability to fill out forms that would be sent directly to the offices of Adult Swim. If they received 25 forms, Adult Swim would vow to sign the original Change.org petition that Small had created. But there was a caveat with Adult Swim's petition. In order to count as one of the 25 submissions, the form needed to include at least 125 words on why the series deserved to be continued, as well as a note that stated, "Adult Swim's endorsement of this petition in no way whatsoever will bring back Metalocalypse." In a bold move, Adult Swim live-streamed the faxes being sent into their office, to which they would simply toss aside into a bin. Despite this, Adult Swim would stay true to their word and live-streamed the signing of the petition. Fans of the show would eventually receive solace when Adult Swim would announce a direct-to-DVD movie for Metalocalypse, as well as the Venture Brothers and Aqua Teen Hunger Force. All three of these movies were estimated to be released this year, but we've yet to hear any hard confirmation on this. Hanna-Barbera assets. Cartoon Network originally purchased the rights to old Hanna-Barbera cartoons like the Flintstones, Adam Ant, the Jetsons, and Johnny Quest. For quite some time, there was no original programming on the network, as it strictly aired reruns of these old cartoons. After some time, the senior vice president of Cartoon Network, Mike Lazo, became agitated by constantly hearing that the network was simply a Hanna-Barbera rerun station. This sparked Lazo to design some original programming for the network. Being a fan of the original Space Ghost, Lazo took inspiration from the popular talk shows at the time, David Letterman and Jay Leno, and created a 2-minute pilot episode of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, utilizing interview footage of Denzel Washington. It was this use of repurposed Hanna-Barbera assets that set the groundwork for the future of Adult Swim, and it was this format and philosophy of an extremely low budget that would set the bar for how many shows would be featured on the late-night network. Adult Swim would also utilize more assets from Hanna-Barbera, with shows such as C-Lab 2021, Harvey Birdman, The Brack Show, and more. Other shows would simply repurpose stock footage and minor characters from Hanna-Barbera shows as well. Space Ghost interviews. In order to acquire the footage to be used on Space Ghost Coast to Coast, the crew would invite the guests to their studio, where a staff member would dress up in a Space Ghost costume and ask them various questions while requesting to be addressed as Space Ghost. These questions may or may not have been relevant to the show's script, but it didn't matter either way, as the editors would take footage of the guests out of order and out of context to fit the needs of the script in a humorous manner. The very first guest on the show was the band The Bee Gees. The guests were so surprised by the interview and constantly broke out into laughter. It's rumored that the voice actor for Brack was actually the one dressed in the Space Ghost costume and posed outlandish questions in a Shakespearean accent, questions such as, "Do you currently have enough oxygen?" The episode aired in a slightly different format than it would eventually become, as they only had around 25 seconds of usable footage from the band. Between their incessant laughter as well as a large amount of cursing, there was very limited footage that would fit within the pre-Adult Swim Space Ghost era. The costumed interviewer method of acquiring footage was only used for 4 or 5 episodes before they realized it was not generating the type of content they were seeking. After this, they would speak only through phone and were told to look into a bright light and simply imagine that they were speaking to a superhero named Space Ghost. Witches Abusing Babies controversy. Perhaps one of the most notorious controversies derived from the series Off the Air which is a psychedelic anthology show that features surreal footage revolving around a single loose theme. It's presented without explanation or narration whatsoever. In 2018, a creator named Mike Diva developed the controversial entitled Pre-Birth that would be featured in the Adult Swim series sometime later. The video displays 3 humanoid beings, each standing in front of a small pillar. A small, rubber-looking baby emerges from the center being's pyramid head and lands on its pedestal. The beings would continue to use the rubber babies as drumsticks to make a unique beat. The baby, Stretch Armstrong, is laughing and giggling, having a good time throughout the whole process, except for one bit where it starts crying, to which the caretaker pulls out keys to jingle in front of it, only to continue beating the rubber baby into a giggling fit. After a short time, the baby lands on the podium and is lowered beneath the ground. The next scene shows what appears to be that same rubber baby being born, implying that this was what happened before birth. Not surprisingly, upset parents hit Twitter complaining about the short. Despite featuring one giggly, happy baby, some found it to be far more indicative of evil acts than a piece of creative art. The video creator as well as Adult Swim both chipped in to respond to the matter. Adult Swim ARG. Coming back around to alternate reality games, Adult Swim featured their own in 2017. It first appeared as a bump displaying, "Hello, my name is Delilah. Designated Emergency Logix Intelligence, Level Arc Habitat. I don't know where I came from. Can you help me?" Followed by @Littlehead in brackets. Very quickly, viewers realized it was an ARG, which is essentially a form of fictional storytelling that utilizes the real world as its stage, and it often involves multiple forms of media and puzzle solving to decipher it. A community was formed to work toward the solving of this puzzle, with many people quickly realizing Littlehead is simply an anagram for Delilah. The ARG would continue over the course of several years, with users discovering Littlehead as being just a code name, so as not to use the identity's real name and be discovered. The story would become quite convoluted over time, and would eventually be discontinued, with rumors abundant that the creators of the ARG had separated from Adult Swim, preventing the finalization of the story. Although an even smaller amount of die-hard fans insist the story has continued in a much more covert manner, with complex puzzles preventing fans from continuing its journey. Unfortunately, we may never know the truth behind it. Robot Chicken Nintendo Direct. In one of the more memorable and self-aware moments of Nintendo's legacy, they teamed up with Robot Chicken to make a parody of their Nintendo Direct press conferences. Some theorize that this may have been in an attempt to make up for poor showings in recent press conferences like E3. It featured Reggie Fils-Aimé, the president and COO of Nintendo of America at that time, introducing several new titles, all the while poking fun at themselves via parodied game characters, as well as disgruntled audience members. This wasn't the only time Nintendo was parodied on Robot Chicken, however.
Pop out one of those connector pins from your circuit board.
What? But then I won't work right.
Just trust me.
Hey, it's not working.
Oh yeah! Oh my god! Oh yeah! Oh yeah!
William Street Sound Origin. Many of you may remember this animation and sound that played after nearly every show on Adult Swim. The familiar low drumming sounds with what appears to be a hammer clanking into something. The sound was actually sampled from an old production company titled Mark 7 Limited. They would also feature this clip after their shows, showing us exactly what the all too familiar logo and sound was inspired from. Clay Croker's Forbidden Folder. One of the most prominent and well-known animators and voice actors for many of Adult Swim's most popular shows. In 2016, Croker became ill and unfortunately passed away. Many of his colleagues and co-workers would go on to share some of their favorite stories involving the man. Several of them had confirmed that he had actually left behind a vast plethora of drawings and artwork, nearly all of which was unreleased. This was coupled with the fact that Croker kept every piece of art he'd ever created. This included a number of not safe for work drawings that he kept in a private, forbidden folder that very few were even given glimpses of. While the folder's entire contents are unknown, several of Croker's peers have confirmed the existence of drawings of what is believed to be Tom and Jerry scat porn. And that's just what he had been comfortable enough to share with his peers. One can only imagine what artwork has been lost forever due to the untimely death of such a tremendous talent. Saved by the Bell. In an attempt to ridicule and mock 80s live-action shows, Adult Swim aired 8 of the 99 episodes of Saved by the Bell, complete with thematic bumpers about the show, and even a temporary rebranding of Adult Swim to, quote, crappy 1980s live-action TV show network. The show only aired for 2 weeks at midnight, only to receive a massively negative viewer reception. But Adult Swim only doubled down on their efforts with a fake press release posted on the Adult Swim website. They stated that the network was going to revive the show under the direction of the newly created 80s Reclamation Department and said, quote, the fans have really shown their support and come out in droves. The purported reboot would feature Screech as the principal of Bayside School, who would enlist the help of the original cast upon being overwhelmed at his job. Eventually, it was revealed that the incident was simply a joke, complete with the fake press release, intended mostly for the online message board community. Carl in GTA 5. In the game Grand Theft Auto 5, you may be lucky enough to come across an Easter egg with a radio station that features a call from Carl of Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Yeah, I'm calling in to request any music that ain't this. Stop playing everything you've been playing, cause your music sounds like a dumpster rolling down 5 flights of stairs.
Aqua Teen Simpsons ad. In 2007, a crossover promo ad for the 2 notable franchises was aired on Adult Swim. This was a parody commercial with no real show or episode it was based on, or the episode only aired once in the designated time slot and simply went on to become lost media. Billboards. Aside from the guerrilla marketing, Adult Swim has also created a number of traditional forms of advertising, like a number of thematic billboards in California, some of which even featured extravagant designs featuring their own unique shows and characters. It's been said that Netflix even acquired one of their bigger billboards and forced Adult Swim to quit advertising on it in 2018. Not surprisingly, Adult Swim would combat this by acquiring a billboard right next to it, along with an even larger billboard on Sunset Boulevard. Adult Swim timeline split. Earlier this year, Adult Swim posted this tweet with the caption, "This could have been avoided." It features a timeline that would be split shortly after the Harambe incident. One timeline would feature our own timeline, in which Harambe did die, including notable events in our own history, including the pandemic, with the most recent entry, the Will Smith slap. It would go on to predict our timeline's events, the California mega flood, a civil war, the implementation of CrossFit becoming mandatory, the Large Hadron Collider opening a portal to hell, and its final entry denoting that President Elon Musk would be the one to cancel Grand Theft Auto 6. On the opposite end of the timeline split, if Harambe had not died, we see a completely different present and future. Daft Punk would never have broken up, all student debt would have been forgiven, deforestation would have been completely ended by 2025, with humanity's first lunar colony the following year. By 2031, the FDA would approve the cure for cancer, and several years later, we'd see the premiere of Rick and Morty Season 11. The final entry on this alternate timeline, 2038, would mark the release of Minecraft 2. Tune in to this channel on December 12th, 2038, where we analyze this timeline prediction and see exactly how much has come true.
Like this video and subscribe to Maker.